Eat that, Galanos, and make a dream you've killed a man. Welcome to Ostracon, a podcast that translates fragments into the whole from which they came. Ernest Hemingway wrote The Old Man and the Sea around 1951 in Cuba. The book was published in 1952. It was, ironically, the last major work of Hemingway's life. It was the only work mentioned by name when Hemingway later received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1954. I was very fortunate to find a first edition copy of the book for a couple of bucks at a used bookstore. So you never know what you might find when you go out fishing. Normally I start these with introduction to the life of the artist, but Hemingway needs no introduction, so we'll skip that and go straight to the meat. We'll review the plot, read an excerpt, and then talk about what it might mean. First, a review of the plot. The Old Man and the Sea occurs in the 1940s in a fishing village near Havana, Cuba. The main character, an old man named Santiago, has had very bad luck. He's a fisherman, and for many weeks he's caught no fish. The word that they use for very unlucky in the book is salao. In fact, he long had a young boy that fished with him, like an apprentice to learn the trade, but he's been so unlucky that the boy's parents thought he'd better find another boat. And so he recently left the old man. So the old man decides that he has to break his unlucky streak. And he decides that he's going to go out farther than he's ever been before. And he takes a little skiff, some meager provisions, and alone, without his apprentice, he goes far, far out. And there he happens to hook the largest marlin imaginable. The fight between them is tremendous and lasts for 3 days. The old man doesn't have a rod. He holds the line in his hands, and he's afraid to tie the line off to the boat because the marlin is so big that he's afraid that a strong run by the fish will snap the line. So he's forced to hold the line all this time. And when the fish runs, he has to let the line slip in order to give line so that it won't snap. His hands are cramped and raw and deeply cut and torn. His back as well. Sometimes he repositions himself to take the line across his back, over his shoulders. He braces himself against the wood of his skiff and all over ends up beaten and wounded and tired. He has very little to eat. He finishes his provisions. He catches a fish, tuna I think it was, and eats some of it raw. And finally, on the third day, the marlin tires enough that he's able to bring it close to the skiff and harpoon it in the heart. The marlin dies. He has broken his bad luck, so it would seem. He's caught the largest fish imaginable. But now he has to get all the way back to the harbor. And the fish is so enormous that he cannot put it in his boat. So he has to lash it to the side of the boat while he heads back. And this leaves a trail of blood in the water, and soon the sharks come. So just when he thought the tremendous struggle of his life was over, it begins anew. And he fights the sharks the best he can. He uses a harpoon that he has in the beginning, but he loses it. Then he has to come up with another weapon. He lashes his knife to the end of an oar, but that eventually breaks. He even clubs and stabs the sharks with the broken tiller of the skiff, fighting them as much as he can. But there's too many of them, and the trip back is too long because he's so far away. And eventually, they eat everything, and there's nothing left for him. He knows that he's made the catch, and he has the evidence of the skeleton still lashed to the boat, but it won't bring him anything to live by. When he finally gets back, he stumbles home and sleeps deeply. Everybody has been out looking for him, and his apprentice finds him asleep in his little house the next morning. There's a crowd of fishermen gathered around the carcass, just the spine and the head and the tail, all that remains from the shark attacks, that is there next to his boat in the harbor. And people are amazed at the size. The old man lets them use the head for fish bait to try to catch others. The rest of it just lolls in the harbor, and a couple of unknowing tourists look at it and mistake it for the skeleton of a shark, the very thing that destroyed it. In fact, they ask the waiter what kind of a fish it is, and the waiter, having limited English, is trying to tell them that it was the sharks that ate the fish, but they mistake the fish for a shark. But the boy returns to the old man. He decides that he has much left to learn from him. And though the old man feels that something within him was broken in the fight, nonetheless, they plan to fish again together as soon as the old man gets well. So let's read an excerpt together. This is during the fight with the sharks after the catch. What will you do now if they come in the night? What can you do? Fight them, he said. I'll fight them until I die. But in the dark now, and no glow showing, and no lights, and only the wind and the steady pull of the sail, he felt that perhaps he was already dead. He put his two hands together and felt the palms. They were not dead, and he could bring the pain of life by simply opening and closing them. He leaned his back against the stern and knew that he was not dead. His shoulders told him. I have all those prayers I promised if I caught the fish, he thought, but I am too tired to say them now. Better to get the sack and put it over my shoulders. He lay in the stern and steered and watched for the glow to come into the sky. I have half of him, he thought. Maybe I'll have the luck to bring the forward half in. I should have some luck. No, he said. You violated your luck when you went too far outside. Don't be silly, he said aloud, and keep awake and steer. You may have much luck yet. I'd like to buy some if there's any place they sell it, he said. What could I buy it with? He asked himself. Could I buy it with a lost harpoon and a broken knife and two bad hands? You might, he said. You tried to buy it with 84 days at sea. They nearly sold it to you, too. That's a reference to how many unlucky days he had with no fish before he went out this time. I must not think nonsense, he thought. Luck is a thing that comes in many forms, and who can recognize her? I would take some, though, in any form, and pay what they asked. I wish I could see the glow from the lights, he thought. I wish too many things. but that is the thing I wish for now." He tried to settle more comfortably, to steer, and from his pain he knew that he was not dead. He saw the reflected glare of the lights of the city at what must have been around 10 o'clock at night. They were only perceptible at first, as the light in the sky before the moon rises. Then they were steady to see across the ocean, which was rough now with the increasing breeze. He steered inside of the glow, and he thought that now soon he must hit the edge of the stream. "Now it is over," he thought. "They will probably hit me again. But what can a man do against them in the dark without a weapon?" He was stiff and sore now, and his wounds and all of the strained parts of his body hurt with the cold of the night. "I hope I do not have to fight them again," he thought. "I hope so much I do not have to fight them again." But by midnight he fought, and this time he knew the fight was useless. They came back in a pack, and he could only see the lines in the water that their fins made, and their phosphorescence as they threw themselves on the fish. He clubbed at heads and heard the jaws chop and the shaking of the skiff as they took hold below. He clubbed desperately at what he could only feel and hear, and he felt something seize the club, and it was gone. He jerked the tiller free from the rudder and beat and chopped with it, holding it in both hands and driving it down again and again. But they were up to the bow now, and driving in one after the other and together, tearing off the pieces of meat that showed glowing below the sea as they turned to come once more. One came finally against the head itself, and he knew that it was over. He swung the tiller across the shark's head where the jaws were caught in the heaviness of the fish's head, which would not tear. He swung it once and twice and again. He heard the tiller break, and he lunged at the shark with the splintered butt. He felt it go in, and knowing it was sharp, he drove it in again. The shark let go and rolled away. That was the last shark of the pack that came. There was nothing more for them to eat. The old man could hardly breathe now, and he felt a strange taste in his mouth. It was coppery and sweet, and he was afraid of it for a moment, but there was not much of it. He spat into the ocean and said, "Eat that, Galanos, and make a dream you've killed a man." He knew he was beaten now finally, and without remedy he went back to the stern and found the jagged end of the tiller would fit in the slot of the rudder well enough for him to steer. He settled the sack around his shoulders and put the skiff on her course. He sailed lightly now, and he had no thoughts nor any feelings of any kind. He was past everything now, and he sailed the skiff to make his home port as well and as intelligently as he could. In the night, sharks hit the carcass as someone might pick up crumbs from the table. The old man paid no attention to them, and did not pay any attention to anything except steering. He only noticed how lightly and how well the skiff sailed now there was no great weight beside her. "She's good," he thought. "She is sound and not harmed in any way except for the tiller. That is easily replaced." He could feel he was inside the current now, and he could see the lights of the beach colonies along the shore. He knew where he was now, and it was nothing to get home. "The wind is our friend anyway," he thought. Then he added, "Sometimes. And the great sea with our friends and our enemies. And bed," he thought. "Bed is my friend. Just bed," he thought. "Bed will be a great thing. It is easy when you are beaten," he thought. "I never knew how easy it was. And what beat you?" he thought. "Nothing," he said aloud. "I went out too far." When he sailed into the little harbor, the lights of the terrace were out, and he knew everyone was in bed. The breeze had risen steadily and was blowing strongly now. It was quiet in the harbor, though, and he sailed up onto the little patch of shingle below the rocks. There was no one to help him, so he pulled the boat up as far as he could. Then he stepped out and made her fast to a rock. He unstepped the mast and furled the sail and tied it. Then he shouldered the mast and started to climb. It was then he knew the depth of his tiredness. He stopped for a moment and looked back and saw in the reflection from the street light the great tail of the fish standing up well behind the skiff's stern. He saw the white, naked line of his backbone and the dark mass of the head with its projecting bill, and all the nakedness between. And then he goes up to his home carrying the mast over his shoulders. The Old Man and the Sea is, quite obviously, a deep reflection on the nature of suffering. The old man, in a way that many of us may have also experienced, gives everything that he has in an attempt to survive, in an attempt to realize himself, to be good at what he does. He fights sleeplessly, destroying himself for his cause. And then when he thinks that he has given every measure of himself, he finds out the fight is not over. He has all night to contend with the sharks. And even then, the fight is not over, because the sharks are going to take everything that he fought for away from him. And then the new fight is one of understanding. What did I suffer for? What am I supposed to do now that I have no material possession to show for it, but rather my endurance, my effort, the fact of my courage, of my struggle? And why does he suffer? He says it's because he went out too far. And certainly that has a part in why he cannot get his catch back. But on the other hand, if he had not gone out too far, maybe he would have been Salao, unlucky, until the end of his life, until he just eventually wasted away, alone, without his apprentice, and without material provision. Maybe he had to go that far out for this transformative experience. Christ's own struggle, which gives meaning to suffering, is integral to an understanding of this piece. And the work even seems aware of that. The old man, Santiago, is named after St. James, by the way, also a fisherman. Think of Santiago de Compostela, a way of pilgrimage, a difficult way, a long way, towards something sacred at the end. Even the wounds on the old man's hands are like the wounds of the crucifixion. He braces himself often against the wood of the skiff, and at one point, when the sharks are coming, there's this line, "I," he said aloud. There is no translation for this word, and perhaps it is just a noise such as a man might make involuntarily, feeling the nail go through his hands and into the wood. And I love that the text tells us that the word referred to is untranslatable. One way to read that is that it requires no translation. It is universal. Notice also that when fighting the fish, he frequently takes the line across his back, like the cross. And when he returns, when everyone is asleep, he puts the mast, the wood of the mast, with its furled sail, across his shoulders like the cross. You can think even of the 3 days that he fights the fish like the 3 days in the tomb. And though the book notes that the old man, Santiago, suffers like Christ, it's not a comparison between him and Christ, because who can compare with Christ? And it is not a likening of him to Christ. He's not a Christ figure. What the book shows is how we suffer with Christ, that Christ suffers, and that when we suffer, it is with him. And the most essential element of that togetherness is the way that Christ has transformed suffering. Faith and Scripture reveal to us that God did not make us to suffer. God made us to love us and to be in a relationship of love with him. But suffering, even death itself, enters into the world when that relationship is broken by us. When the relationship is broken, then we suffer all that it means to be broken away from the source of being. God is what it means to be. And so when we are broken from that, there is an absence of being, an absence of good, which manifests as death and suffering. When we are broken from the timeless, the eternal, it manifests in the suffering of being contingent on time, of the things that we love and cherish ending. But now, look what God does with this. The identity of Christ is that he uses the very thing that was not meant for us, the very thing that hounds us and shackles us, the thing that destroys us, he takes and transforms to the creative will of God. It is in accepting suffering and death that Christ, fully God, fully human, goes through the resurrection and transforms the human person, transforming the substance of our bodies themselves through death and into the eternal reunification with God, the source of being. So by taking death and suffering and transforming them to a creative good and to the generative will and the love that God is, then God has subjugated everything in the world, even those things that were not meant for us. God has subjugated them and transformed them to a generative and creative good. The identity of Christ and our salvation changes what it means to suffer. Suffering is no longer the same thing because it is not mere pain. There is communion in it with Christ, and it becomes directional. It becomes salvific. It has direction and purpose because it is the way that we have been saved. And so, participating in it with Christ is a way that we participate in our own salvation. In fact, St. Pope John Paul II went so far as to call us co-redeemers. Though it is God alone that saves, in suffering in communion with Christ, we are a part of the very act that saves us. I realize this is a hard thing to hear, a hard thing to say to anyone who may be suffering now. But I say it in hope that it can bring hope. And if you want to learn more about St. John Paul II's theology of co-redemption, you should read his work on human suffering, which we'll link to in the notes. But for today's purposes of interpretation, we find here the meaning of this work, that the old man's suffering is transformative because he goes through it with Christ. How do we know he goes through it with Christ? Because he never gives up, and he does not despair, and he does not lament. He is sad, of course, for all that he's lost. The sense of injustice of it, of course, is heavy on him. In fact, it's its own part of the suffering. But you know he's suffering with Christ because the suffering is affirmative to him. It affirms his human identity. It affirms his own goodness. If all of this were nothing, chance alone, and suffering was only bad, there would be nothing affirming in it. But Santiago, the old man, has an experience like our own personal experience, that there is something to be gained, that we are made in the way that we endure. And he endures, and he will, in the end, fish again. That's why I love so much the line that I read. It's my favorite line in the book, and it's why I included it in the excerpt. When he feels the coppery, sweet taste of blood in his mouth, and he spits it into the water and tells the shark, "Make a dream you have killed a man." It's a dream because he has not died, though the sharks have taken away from him everything that he has suffered for, though this whole experience may indeed have shortened his days on earth. He is not dead, and it is a dream that he could ever be dead, because in a co-redemptive way he is affirmed in his endurance. In a similar way, you hear it so many times, including in the excerpt I read, where he knows that he is alive because of his pain. That affirms to him that he is not dreaming, that he is not lost in some netherworld, just floating out there in pain on the ocean. No, the pain tells him that he's alive, that there's struggle in him yet. Where there's struggle, there's purpose, there's direction, there's meaning. As Chesterton wonderfully said, a dead thing goes with the stream. A living thing swims against it. There are a couple of other elements to the story that are worth thinking about in relation to this broader theme. One is the lights in the Bay of Havana. So the old man goes out so far that at one point he can't see the lights. And when he does his overnight battle with the sharks, it says a couple of times that he's hoping for the lights on the horizon, but he doesn't see them. He's in darkness in his battle. But he comes through. He comes through having never blamed God. He comes through in an affirmation of his identity, and the lights appear. And then he can tell where he is, and the lights on the horizon guide him home. And he gets back when everyone else is asleep. Much like the guiding principles that we must hold dear in tribulation. He knows the lights are there, even when he can't see them. He perseveres until he can, and they orient him to the truth. They orient him to his direction and to his home. But there's more that we can say relative to the light and to the direction. You notice the term in the excerpt that he steers inside the light. And this is a double entendre. On the one hand, it's a navigational term, meaning he steers at some angle to the light, so that his forward motion, combined with the influence of the wind and the influence of the currents and tides, will bring him to his destination, even if he points at an angle to it. But it also means just what it says, that he steers inside the light. that he is headed for. Because he heads for it, it is as though he is already within it, because the direction towards it is the defining principle of what he is doing. And there's more to be said about that direction. You know, the sharks that attack the marlin, some of them are identified as shovelhead sharks, which are real sharks, but also call to mind the shovel with which you might bury someone. So even the name of the sharks that assail him evokes death. And how does he fight them? In the last, he fights them with the tiller of the boat. And for those of you who don't know, the tiller is the handle attached to the rudder that you use to steer the boat. It is the way that he's directing himself home towards the light. And that is the thing that he uses to fight his assailants. So it is almost as though he is fighting them with the nature of his direction itself. It is the meaning that he holds to his faith in suffering and the way that it transforms him and realizes his identity that is the antidote to the suffering itself that attacks him. His relationship to the marlin is also a very interesting piece of the story. He has great respect for, even awe of the marlin, and yet he has to fish it. He has to hunt it because it's how he survives. And even though he does kill it, notably with a spear to the heart, he wishes to protect it. And he fights with all his might to defend it from the sharks. And the way that it's written, you feel that he's fighting not only because he wants the money that the food will bring. That's almost secondary. He fights because the fish is too great to be consumed that way by the sharks. It is an extension of his awe for the fish. And there is something in this relationship that mirrors, again, this co-redemptive relationship with Christ. It is appropriate to be in awe of God, and yet Christ subjects himself to death, a death of courage in the face of injustice, which is also worthy of awe. And who does he die for? Us, to preserve us. And so much like Santiago hunts the fish in order to live, in order to eat, he also is in awe of the fish, as we are in awe of God, who gives us his own death that we also could live, could survive. In fact, gives us the Eucharist that we can eat, and by consuming, be transformed, not only spiritually, not only mentally, but physically, into that which has transformed us, into the source of our awe. As Santiago and all of us are transformed by the ordeals of life. And perhaps that's why the sting and the brilliance of the mistaken tourists at the end of the book is so resonant. When they see the skeleton of this great marlin, and they mistake it for the skeleton of the shark, the very thing that has destroyed it, the very thing that the man fought against, it is like a final indignity. It is like that in life too, that our good intentions are often misunderstood, that we're blamed for things we didn't do or didn't mean, that we are punished or marginalized for trying to be what we feel we are called to be. But you notice that this indignity has no effect on the dignity of the old man's struggle, of his perseverance, of his return. It has no effect on who he has become through his struggle. Though it is unfair, the ones that suffer are the ones that have made the mistake. Because in making the mistake, they are deprived of the truth of the story. Christ is much maligned and bears more insults now than when he hung on the cross. But it does not change the transformative nature of his act or his identity, nor does it change how he has transformed us. I want to say a word, too, about the nakedness of the bones of the marlin, where the text is very clear that as it lies there next to the boat, there's the head and the tail, and in between is the naked spine. It is as though all that the old man strove for has been picked clean, and he is now stripped to his own essential self, his own first self, as in the beginning, naked, without pretension, without the trappings, the defenses of all the things we've done or all the things that we might have done or failed to do. Just simply in the garden, in relationship with God, and it is sufficient. He overcomes the struggle by his perseverance, and this returns him to this pure, essential state. Finally, the book ends very touchingly because the boy, the apprentice to Santiago, comes back. He's worried about him when he's been gone for days, and people went out searching. Nobody found him because nobody went out as far as he did. The boy's relieved to find his skiff in the harbor, and he finds the old man sleeping in his shack and brings him coffee and starts to nurse him back to health. And the boy wants to fish with him again. And the old man missed the boy. He tells him how much he missed him, and he's aware of how hard it was to go through this fight alone, talking to himself. It's good to have a companion to talk with. And the boy doesn't care about the old man's bad luck. What's important to him now is what the old man means and what his struggle means. The boy wants a spear himself. What he needs to fight is the old man fought. He says that he has much to learn from him. Not because he brought back a great fish. He didn't. It has nothing to do with his material success. He has much to learn from the old man because of who he is. And they will take their boats out together, generation to generation, in the transmission of truth, to learn. So it's not enough to say, as many strictly secular interpretations do, that the old man struggles against death. Because what does that even mean? He struggles and by worldly metrics fails. And in any event, death is inevitable. The truth of the story that we intrinsically recognize in our hearts is only revealed in light of the identity of Christ. Because he struggles to what end? Why is it that his struggle is contrary to death? It is because he is united with Christ in his suffering in a redemptive and transformative way that then gives it value, that then makes it contrary to death. And the transmission of that truth then to the boy is the fullness of the story's meaning. All of this reminds me of a quote from St. Teresa of Calcutta that I'd like to end with. People are often unreasonable, irrational, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, People may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some unfaithful friends and some genuine enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and sincere, people may deceive you. Be honest and sincere anyway. What you spend years creating, others could destroy overnight. Create anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, some may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today will often be forgotten. Do good anyway. Give the best you have, and it will never be enough. Give your best anyway. In the final analysis, it is between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway.